Our next speaker, Joe Ortego, is from New York. My wife's also a New Yorker, so that's probably one of the reasons I enjoy listening to him talk so much. He has tried more than 100 cases to verdict, and he co-leads Nixon Peabody's commercial litigation practice. He focuses on commercial, product liability, insurance coverage, and class action litigation, and his team recently took a unanimous jury defense verdict in a helicopter crash case in Texas, which hopefully he'll get a chance to touch on during his speech today. Joe will talk about in-house counsel's opportunities to guide their companies through the cybersecurity minefield. Please welcome Joe Ortego.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to chat with you. And this morning, I hate to bring the bearer of bad news, but this is old bad news. So I don't feel too badly that we're in a nice resort setting and I've got to scare you all. Why did I pick the good, the bad, and ugly for my talk on cybersecurity and cybercrime? Well, I first thought about this. I said, this is great. I like the movie. It's a lot of fun, so let's see if we can work it in, because it's a classic Clint Eastwood spaghetti Western. And how appropriate for cybersecurity and cybercrime, because Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, really is synonymous with the threats that our clients face in cybercrime and cybersecurity. It's the criminal without the name. And a spaghetti Western, why would that be important for us today? Well, a spaghetti Western is sort of the patchwork of the laws that are here to help protect us and the patchwork of the prosecutorial agencies that are here to protect us. It's a patchwork that's a spaghetti mess, which is hard to figure out. And what's better than the Wild West? Because when you look at cybercrime in particular, it is the Wild West. It is ugly, it is bad, and there is some good here. So we'll talk about that as well. But it's the Wild West with cybercrime, and it's hard to understand. It's hard to understand how it happens, and it's wonderful for the criminals. And so I decided that since we were at the resort, I've got to be nice, so I've reordered the theme. Instead of the good, the bad, and the ugly, let's start off with the ugly, let's start off with the bad, and let's end up with the good. And if we're going to talk about the ugly, what is the ugly in cybersecurity? It's the emerging trends and those emerging trends and the unexpected consequences. It's not just the theft of data, but we'll talk about the unexpected consequences of cybercrime. What's the bad? I guess we're part of the bad, because as counsel, we're unprepared. And given the disjointed legal framework that's out there, that the lawyers, of course, are to blame, it's an ugly situation. And I will talk a little about lawyers and how prepared we are. And this goes for law firms, not just companies, on how well we're prepared. What's the good here? The good is the technological progress. And we have now 10 steps from the experts in which we think we can follow, and if we follow, we'll discharge our fiduciary duty. And then finally, I'll talk about these unexpected consequences and what we can do to be prepared, to create a partnership and to be prepared for cybercrime. Okay, ugly. What's the ugly? If you look at some of this stuff, look at these quotes. There are more bad actors who are more organized with better tools. This trend and shows signs of no subsiding. While 2013 was a bad year for IT security, there is no disputing that 2014 was the worst. And not being a soothsayer, I can guarantee you that 2015 will be a lot worse. So what's the bottom line? Your clients, your law firms, your businesses are going to be hacked. It's not if, it's when. And even though it's when, we seem to sit back thinking it's not going to be us. It's going to be one of us in this room, and it'll probably be one of us in this room today. So what must we do as lawyers? Because this is an IT problem, of course, not ours. Wrong. This is our problem. The lawyers are always to blame. So first, as lawyers, we must understand the nature and the scope of the threat, and before we can do anything, to be prepared. What are the emerging trends? What are the ugly emerging trends? Attacks on the Internet of Things. And it took me a while to understand, what is the Internet of Things? Well, the Internet of Things are all the devices that use the Internet. Think about it. Your thermostat in your home, your car, your router, your camera. All are connected to the Internet of Things. And these are all subject to attack. Well, what's the big deal? Well, in 2020, there'll be 26 billion internet things that are subject to be hacked. Think about protecting all of those, and think about your company's obligations of protecting all of those. There are more holes in open source software. You've all heard about the Heartbleed bug, and well, these codes are insecure. Think about our credit cards for a long time that didn't have a chip embedded. They were insecure. Things are insecure. These codes are insecure. Then there's the growing threat to healthcare, and that is a big thing. With the public health information, we have to protect that information, and the lawsuits are now coming down for people who do not protect that information. Medical records are being stolen, medical records are being hacked into, and they're being used for nefarious purposes, and we are responsible for that. And wearable technology, which was touched on a little earlier. Wearable, how about your little Fitbit that goes into the internet? What kind of information is that where it can keep track of what you've done and where you've gone and where you've been? What value does that have? That is sort of the growing needs and the growing threats that we have. The ugly emerging trends, smarter malware. It's getting harder and harder to detect. Well, how did I learn about this? I have a son-in-law that helps to detect these things, and he explained it to me. And he says for each time we come up with something, something better comes up, better malware comes up. The cloud, where we keep our data, is at greater risks. Let's think about the cloud. What is the cloud? It's the keys to the castle, the passwords to everything, and the cloud is extremely vulnerable. How about the information that we put on the cloud as law firms? How about the information, personal information we put on the cloud? How secure is that? And who is responsible for that? And then there was the business email compromise, which is the CEO fraud scam. And this I found interesting because I think about this because, you know, maybe we're stupid and individuals are stupid. How many people in their law firm have gotten an email, some young lawyer comes into you, I've got this great new case. They want our direct deposit number, they want our wire number, and we got this, I brought in new business, make me a partner. And so they come in and you say, well, this is a fraud. Well, CEOs of companies don't fall for that, do they? Well, I looked at the data for international wire transfers. In 2015, 7,000 victims, 7,000 companies were victimized by international wires for a total of $750 million. These are the brightest and well-compensated people in the country, and they're falling for it. I guess our associates aren't so silly. Now, what are the unexpected consequences? This I loved. Who remembers Ashley Madison? Well, there were 37 million men, of course no women, that was part of the fraud, that were involved, who had their credit cards exposed, who had their names exposed, and had to have some frank conversations with their spouses when they got home. But of course, as you know, 36,999,000 of those men were only curious about the site and never used it. But you try to explain that to people and what's going on, and that is an unexpected consequence. Because what was the unexpected consequence here? Well, the unexpected consequence was the fraud. The site was a fraud. The women on the site were a fraud. There were no women on that site. It was just a bunch of desperate men looking for women. They can't get them on their own. And what about that fraud? So it was a fraud. So do you think at Ashley Madison they were thinking about that? That somehow some hacker would come in and expose fraud, improper conduct, and criminal behavior? And that's exactly what the hackers did. It wasn't about adultery and embarrassment and credit cards. It's about this. Their company was exposed. It was a fraudulent company. But I want you to think about unintended consequences, because all our law firms and our companies are pristine and clean, so I'm sure if a hacker got in there, they would never find something terrible about our company or anything bad about our company, but you never know. Let's go through the what if. What if Sony, when they were hacked, some emails came out that they violated the FCPA or the UK anti-bribery statute? You think it's a possibility there might be a salesman in there that might have been doing that in China? I don't know, maybe. How about Blue Cross Blue Shield when they were hacked? What happens if they went in there and they found things that violated the ACA? For example, that they were disclaiming on pre-existing conditions when they weren't allowed to. What would happen if that came in during the hacking, which it did not? Or what about the Office of Personal Management in Catherine Trudletta? What happens if when they hacked into that, they found out that she made decisions based upon political leaning, which we know never has happened before at a government agency, but what happens if that? Those are the unexpected consequences of cybersecurity. We think about liability, we think about money damages, but it could be a lot uglier. And who is responsible for protecting that information? We are as lawyers, and we are as lawyers. It's not the IT department anymore, it's us as lawyers. So what's the bad? Well, here's the bad. Price Waterhouse did a survey, and in that survey they found that over 50% of the CIOs and CSOs claim they are unprepared. And guess what? More than 50% of the general counsels of companies said they are unprepared. More importantly in that survey, the corporate leaders said they believe they lack confidence in their organization's preparedness. And it's just not in IT. They lacked confidence in the legal department's ability to comply with cybersecurity and their ability to respond. And what I thought was interesting about the survey was that the CIOs and the CEOs of these companies point to the lawyers for have the responsibility. It's not just the IT department. Is increased scrutiny on leadership. What do you think happens when there's a cybersecurity breach? Well, the CEO goes and the general counsel goes too. Ask the folks at Ashley Madison what happened. And do you think that the general counsel and the CEO might have necessarily known about the fraud? Maybe not. But they go and they're held responsible. Inconsistent regulatory landscape. This is frightening. There are 47 states that have different rules governing cybersecurity and cybercrime. 47 different sets of rules. And then you have 50 federal statutes that all can be applied to this. And we as lawyers are supposed to figure out how to prevent this. And more interesting now is that the class action vehicle has now been used in order to handle these cases and handle these breaches. In Minnesota, it was considered an appropriate thing. And in Minnesota, not only did Target have to pay $10 million to consumers, the banks were part of the class action, and it was $67 million to the banks. So think about some of this aspects, and that's not counting attorney's fees. And I'm sure, even given the recent case in Delaware, that the attorney's fees on these are quite rich. So I can't imagine who will be now surfing for these type of cases. I look forward to when the financial institutions turn to the same class action plaintiffs lawyers who they hated and despised to get money for themselves, and that's going to come. That is definitely going to come. So what's the lessons learned? Well, the lessons learned here is pretty good, is that we're getting feedback. General counsel are getting feedback, IT departments are getting feedback, and things are getting better because we are learning from our mistakes. And we need to continue to learn from our mistakes. Encryption. There are better solutions now. Better encryption solutions. Hey, there's a decrease in payment breaches. Why? Because credit card companies decided that they should put a chip and do something different for security. That has improved, and that is actually down. Virtual payment, more secure. This is not a commercial for Apple Pay, but it is more secure, it is more protected, and people are doing that. There are better data loss prevention tools. We are coming up with better data loss prevention tools to prevent this. And how many of you know about the different data loss prevention tools? I wouldn't know it if I didn't have a son-in-law in the business. There are different things that are available, but very few of us know about this. Here's the agenda. What are we going to do to protect ourselves? And this is the rules called the Pearson Agenda, which tells you what you can do as a lawyer. And a lot of these things, when I first read them, I said, this doesn't really apply to me as a lawyer, for a client or a general counsel, but they really do. You have to protect the exercise of your fiduciary duty. It is a lawyer's duty, and it's been found, to protect the board, to protect its senior management, and to protect the stock price, which are the stockholders of a public company. You need to, as a lawyer, enact communications and training, both internal and external. Internally, what do you do when there's a breach? And externally, what do you say when there's a breach? And what do you say to the government agencies? And we'll talk a little about this. The government is not necessarily your friend in cyber breaches. If you think you're going to be buddies with the government and they're going to protect you, they are not necessarily going to protect you. You need to guide the public and private partnerships. What do you mean by that? Is you've got to develop partnerships. This is not a problem in which you sit in your company and say, I'm going to solve it myself. This is the time to talk to competitors and colleagues in other legal departments and ask what they're doing. Because you will find that most of us are at a loss. And law firms are no bargain either, because we don't talk to our competitors and what they're doing, but we should be talking to our competitors and what they're doing, because that's the only way you learn. It is changing too quickly. We have to achieve compliance. Well, with 47 different state rules and federal rules, it's difficult. But it is the responsibility of us as lawyers to make sure that our companies and our clients are in compliance. Appoint cybersecurity counsel. I used to think this was an IT issue. No, it is an attorney issue. And what do I mean by an attorney issue? I am not an IT expert. I never will be. I don't understand it. I was doing paper research when I was in law school and looking at shepherds and shepherdizing cases. But I have learned now that I know how to ask the right questions. And that's all we need to do. We need to know how to ask the right questions. Or get a son-in-law in the business. Create a crisis plan. And you need a crisis plan both externally and internally. What happens if this does happen? And it's suggested that you do what I call as a fire drill. Let's make believe at our company we have a cybersecurity breach. We have a breach. The data has been hacked. What do? You should be actually play acting what you do, just like you would do for a fire drill. This is what we're going to do. And you have your crisis management plan. Insurance. Most of the traditional insurance does not cover this, but there is cyber insurance, and it's available. And some of the people that are our guests will gladly talk to you about cyber insurance, and they have great policies. Why not have that? How could you not have that under the circumstances when a breach can break a company completely? Monitor public policy. This is the Wild West. Everything changes every day. You've got to have somebody monitoring what's happening, what's going on, and keeping track of what's happening. And we've got to discharge our fiduciary duty, our duty of care. Protect the client and protect the client information. We as lawyers must continuously think about what we're doing with client communications and what we're doing to protect them from being hacked in the traditional way or in the technological way. Those are the rules. So what do I have to say about this? It's going to happen. It's happening more and more often to companies, and if you think you're different, it's not going to work. It will cost time, money, and reputation and standing if you do get hacked. And you may not survive if you do not have a plan and take these steps. Be aware of the unexpected consequences of the breach. This is something that I don't think any of us thought about until recently, for example, with the Ashley Madison case, which is a lot of fun, but think about the unintended consequences. If you think that your company is clean and when they're hacked and there's not something out there that you might be embarrassed for that might create issues, I got to tell you, you're wrong. As a former prosecutor, there's always something there that you've done wrong. It's just a matter of how bad it was. You've got to have robust compliance and robust cybersecurity. And finally, as you see in this picture, we got to make friends. We got to be nice to the government. We've got to ask them questions. We've got to talk to them and ask them and bring them on board. We have to talk to our colleagues and make friends and ask what they're doing. And this is a thing that we have to do together, because this enemy is greater than all of us on an individual basis. But together, we have some hope. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and good luck, and I would check your cloud tonight.